What were our takeaways from day one in Surprise? We'll get to them in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into a Sunday edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And of course, you can always find us on wherever you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music. We're on Google Podcast and Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If it's your first time tuning in, well, usually we don't bring you Sunday episodes. We just do Monday through Friday. But since we're down here in Surprise, we're going to be bringing you every little bit of content that we can. Again, you follow my Twitter handle, you can't miss an ounce of coverage that we have. And we'll also be bringing you some one-on-one interviews throughout the next couple of days. We actually just had a one-on-one sit down this morning with Lucas Ursig. That's now out there on Spotify and all the podcasting platforms. Not on video, just because we didn't have a camera for this podcast set up. There will be some video shots that we do have and some minor clips that will be posted, but not the entirety of the interview. If you want to listen to that, you just go to wherever you do get your podcast. But a perfect time for the new listeners to be joining in because we got all access coverage down here in Surprise, Arizona. And tomorrow, tons of more interviews, tons of more content, tons of more video, as will be on Tuesdays. Well, might actually be bringing you two separate one-on-one interviews tomorrow with a couple of starters, but still TBD on that. That all really comes down to what it looks like once we show up to the facility. There's some college baseball going on at the complex. Games don't start till next week, but still lots going on for the Royals and the Rangers, for that matter, down at camp. And this first segment will be dedicated to just some takeaways that I had. We had access to the clubhouse today. We spoke to Matt Quatrero today. Tomorrow, we're going to be speaking with Quatrero, John Sherman, and J.J. Piccolo, as well as getting to see some of the practice. Jack Caglione took some BP today, some of the younger guys. We'll talk about them in the second segment. And then to close out today's show, I want to dive into what I saw from Noah Cameron, because if you weren't a believer into what he was going to be able to do in camp yet, I feel like this segment is going to give you some of that confidence as to what he might be able to do for the Royals in 2025. But as far as some of the early takeaways that I have, some of them will be pretty simple, just how the player is, what they sound like, how easy they are to interact with. Number one, Carlos Estevez might be the easiest guy to root for going into the year. Was one of the most pleasant interviews that we've ever had. Was very excited about being here in Kansas City. Said some interesting things about how the deal went down. I put it out there on Twitter, but he's one of those guys that was one of the top relievers on the market. Royals reached out to him in early January, then about a week later approached him once again and said, "We really want you. Here's our offer. We want to get this done." And he said after that, it was a pretty fast-moving thing where that deal was accepted. He joined the Royals organization, and now he gets to be a part of a bullpen that surely should be a lot better this year than it was last year. Didn't get a chance to see Seth Lugo or Bobby Witt Jr. today, but as we all know, the Monday workouts will begin tomorrow. Will be an early day for us. We'll probably get out to the complex around 7:30, maybe 7:45 for some of you out there. Not really early to you. For me, that is early for me, but I'll still be sure to have tons of interviews loaded up for you guys. But Carlos Estevez, such a nice guy, seems to be very pumped to be out there. A couple other injury updates that we had. Hunter Harvey, spoke with him in the clubhouse today, seems to be pretty healthy. Didn't have any setbacks so far in camp, didn't have any setbacks this offseason. But I did take away that it appears last season when he got to Kansas City, never really felt 100%, had a strain in his back that was more so in the middle of his back. I spoke with Jalen Thompson, has done a great job, covering the team down here for the KC Star. Annie Rogers, same thing for MLB.com. She got a phenomenal video of Jack Caglione when he was first taking BP. The ball sounds different off the bat. But I was speaking with Jalen Thompson about that injury for Hunter Harvey, and he was telling me that strain in the middle of the back can't really rotate. So when you're out there on the mound and you're struggling, that can really affect you. And it was hard for him to build back from that. When you suffer an injury in your back, you're not really hoping it's anywhere on your back, right? Upper body, still going to be a problem for you. But that middle portion of your body, even more so than the lower half, that's pretty difficult to do anything out there on the mound. I'm not sure how you can throw with any sort of conviction if you are dealing with that middle back strain. And that's what he had. But now at camp, appears to be healthier. He's ready to pitch in whatever role the Royals put him in. And that's been the theme for all the relievers out there. Talked with Estevez today, talked with Harvey, talked with Lucas Erceg. Hopefully can get to John Schreiber and a couple other guys tomorrow. Spoke with James MacArthur. I understand he's a guy that certainly has gotten his criticism based on how he performed last year, but such a great guy to talk to. Take that for what it is. Most of these guys are great human beings and polite to the media and will sit down and have a conversation with you. But James MacArthur, even going back to last year, coming off success in September, he was one of those great guys to interview. He's so insightful about the game. He's very honest up front. And speaking on this injury, said that he felt it late in the season in September, threw a pitch, didn't feel right. They went and got some imaging done, felt like they could let it heal naturally. But in the end, they all decided surgery is going to be the best course of action. He'll have that delayed start to camp. Annie Rogers, Jalen Thompson, they reported on that before we got down here, but wanted to get kind of the word of mouth from James MacArthur on what he's been dealing with, what the plan will be for him moving forward. But did find that interesting that late in the season, and we saw the struggles. Well, let's not get it twisted. We saw the struggles in the middle portion of the season. Didn't sound like he was dealing with an injury there, more so of just the ups and downs of a reliever. And he's still somebody the Royals value pretty highly, and he can make an impact for this bullpen in 2025. Just might not be there to start the season because of this delayed start to camp. Maybe the most interesting thing we got to today in surprise was speaking with Matt Quatrero. Had a chance to ask him a few questions about MJ's new approach at the plate, about his stance, the hand placement, basically now more so of a closed stance than an open stance. He's a completely different looking hitter, and I don't mean that in terms of how the ball comes off the bat or how successful he'll be. He will be one of those guys in camp when you're watching the first TV broadcast. You're not going to recognize who it is. It's that different. It's that drastic of a change for his stance. And Q basically answered it with, it's his swing, it's his career. When I asked him about, did he want to make the change? Did a coach come to him and say, we got to make the changes? He said it was a combination of both. But at the end of the day, it is his swing. It is his career. He would have to be the one to initiate that and saying, I need to get better in this aspect. I feel like this can be the best way in doing that. But coaches also gave him some suggestions on, here's how we should do it. Here's how you should place your hands. Here's the difference between an open stance and a closed stance when you got your hands back here. So it was a combination of everything. But I did enjoy hearing more so of the blunt side of Matt Quatrero there, which we do get the blunt side more often than not, but saying it's his career, it's his swing. We're not going to hold his hand, and I'm more so speaking now than what Q is saying, but along the lines of he's going to have to be the one to make those changes. He's going to have to be the one to notice where things are uncomfortable, they're not working for him. But at the end of the day with MJ Melendez, what's going to be the difference maker is when the slump happens. Every player goes through a slump. It all depends on when that slump happens. Is it in April? Is it in May, June, July, August, so on and so forth? If you hold off until the middle of the season and you're dealing with some of those struggles, you might be able to revert back to how good you were in April and May, and that gets you through a slump. However, that slump happens in April, and the way it did for MJ last year, naturally a player and their mindset is going to say, well, I'm going to go back to what was once comfortable, even if it's not working. We all do that, right? We all do that with bad habits, where once you start to get nervous again, you're dealing with pressure, you revert back to what you used to do, the bad habit. And maybe MJ Melendez's bad habit is the stance that he once had, but the leg kick, it's gone. The hand placement, it's different. The stance is now closed. Completely different looking hitter. And when that slump does occur, you're hoping it's in the middle of the summer when he's already built up enough credibility with this new stance to take it and run with it. But with MJ, that's all up in the air. He could look good in spring training. He might be able to carry it into the regular season. The reality is we don't know. I just found that pretty interesting with Matt Quatraro of he was the one that came to us. We made suggestions, but we're also not going to sit there and every single year say, well, we're going to make this adjustment, this adjustment. It's good to hear that a player can be forthcoming and go, I need to make adjustments. What are some suggestions you guys may have that could benefit me? And we'll certainly see next week once games start happening and what that stance looks like against opposing pitching and not just live BPs that we're seeing right now in camp. And lastly, a lot of people are going to be asking about this middle of the order bat. Had a couple of interesting conversations today, not with JJ Picollo, not with people in the front office, but more so of a poll of people around the organization of what might be a possibility. For those thinking the outfield is going to be the exact same, Melendez, Isbel, and Renfroe, I'm believing at this point it's not going to be that simple, where Melendez is going to be in left, Isbel in center, Hunter Renfroe is in right. This isn't to say a new bat's on the way. I said on Friday that a bat coming in before the first full squad workout, my confidence level was 10 to 20%. Now it's pretty much to 1% unless some breaking news happens after I post this podcast. The only breaking news we got is Luke Mailey being brought in on a minor league deal for some catching depth. No big bat has been acquired, though, and there's not many big bats out there available in free agency. In fact, there's none. There are big bats through trade. You just can't force teams to trade with you. However, the reason I say it's not as simple is some of these infielders, that's going to be what decides a lot with the outfield. Jonathan India, Michael Massey, right? Who's going to play second base? One of them is going to be the everyday second baseman. The other is going to have to learn how to play another position. If Michael Garcia can make that transition to center field and platoon a little bit with Kyle Isbell, show that he can handle the defensive responsibilities of center field, now you can move a Jonathan India or a Michael Massey to third base, and you have a platoon situation in center field, or vice versa, Jonathan India and Michael Massey learn how to play left field. Well, Garcia can stay at third base, but one of those guys is going to be playing in left field or platooning with Melendez, and I wouldn't say that India's platooning with Melendez, and Massey's probably not platooning with a Renfroe or a Melendez, of course, because they're both left-handed hitters. That's why I believe this Garcia situation with center field might be the answer. Spoke with Jalen Thompson a little bit too on this, just throwing out ideas here and there. Just a good conversation. Nothing to it, more so just hypotheticals, what it could look like. But that's one scenario I hadn't really considered too much of what is this outfield going to look like if Garcia can show he can play that spot? What's it going to look like if Jonathan India can play third base? Those are all the moving parts that we're going to find out in spring training. But if they don't bring in a bat, don't for a second believe it's just going to be Melendez, Isbell, and Renfroe every single day out there. There are more pieces out there that can move and learn that position. Therefore, the outfield would be shaken up just a little bit. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I want to dive into some of these younger players, these soon-to-be rookies showing out in camp. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. And find our content on wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Again, just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. And if you want nonstop coverage from Surprise, Arizona, follow that Twitter handle at JohnnyJ_15. The reason I bring up that Twitter handle is that there's been some fantastic shots out there, not just, my coverage. Annie's done some great work. Other Royals social media people have done phenomenal work. Jalen Thompson, who we were talking about in the first segment, phenomenal work as well. Some of these young guys are showing out for the cameras in camp. And what's fun about this part of covering the team, being down here, is that there's a separation of players on 3 or 4 different fields. Sometimes you are drawn to a field because you recognize a player and say, I want to see them play. Jonathan India stands out very much so. He's got the long curly hair. It was pretty easy to find him out of the crowd and go watch him take a couple rounds of BP. It's easy to see Michael Wacha because he's 6'6", he's slender, he stands out amongst the crowd. Salvador Perez, same thing. Sometimes with the other players, you just happen to stumble upon the field and you start watching these guys, and that will lead us into our final segment. I stumbled upon Noah Cameron today. I did not expect to be standing near his field when he was throwing a BP, but I'm glad I did. But for some of these other younger players, not 10, 15 minutes into our video coverage today, we had a chance to watch Carter Jensen take BP. We actually spoke to Carter Jensen, and I might be able to post that 3 to 4 minute clip at some point throughout the week. Great kid, very knowledgeable about the game. Like with many of the guys we interviewed today, so easy to root for. But Carter Jensen took BP along with some other catchers out on one of the fields near I would say the back half of the complex. There's 2 fields that are right near the clubhouse, right near the media relations office. These fields are a little bit more tucked away. So again, you stumble upon a player, you really just lucked into it. But with Carter Jensen, there was this one round they were doing where it was a all or nothing swing. Right? It was 110% energy into one pitch. They all got one pitch to face. This was at the very tail end of their BP. And I had seen a couple of rounds. He was going the other way a little bit. Ball jumps off his bat. But in this one pitch scenario, he took a middle half BP ball and crushed it well over the wall in right center field. And it's a different sound off the bat. And he's a big kid now. You imagine these 18 and 19-year-old kids showing up to camp like they just came from high school. Sometimes that's the case, but I can say this with Carter Jensen and Blake Mitchell and Jack Caglione. Those are big dudes. Like Blake Mitchell surprised me at his stature. He was standing next to Salvador Perez at one point. He's not as tall as Salvi, but he's filled out a little bit now where he looks like a true catcher behind the plate. Carter Jensen, same thing. But the swing is so smooth. The swing is pretty, and that ball sailed 50 to 60 feet over the wall in right center field. It wasn't even close. Even the guys that were shagging fly balls in right center field didn't even give it a look. It was crushed that far. Also with Blake Mitchell, saw a few of his swings from a distance. I was over at the field watching Noah Cameron, who we'll get to in the final segment. Swing looks good. Power's really there as well. That was one thing I did not expect to see going into camp, is more so the display of power with some of these younger guys. However, the story of what I eventually went up to the field and saw is what everybody listening is going to take away here. It was Jack Caglione. And Andy Rogers put out the video on Twitter. It's a phenomenal video, mainly because of the audio. The sound of the ball connecting with the bat is something I don't remember hearing last year. It's something I didn't hear all of today, even with Carter Jensen's home run. And even watching Salvador Perez and Michael Massey. Michael Massey homered off Michael Wacha in their live action BP situation. Vinny Pasquantino had a couple of hard swings. The ball leaving Jack Caglione's bat doesn't sound human. It sounds like a cannon shot times 10. And some of these balls were not leaving the yard. They were gappers. They were right center. They were left center. They were down the line. But to see the swing up there, and we talked to Carter Jensen about this too, the Arizona Fall League, and I asked him what stood out. What was the one thing that was a wow factor? And he brought up the power, the sheer raw power and the work ethic. And that goes without saying. You see the size of Jack Caglione, and you think he can hit the ball pretty far. There's no way he's a slap hitter with that type of build. And he came in late to the clubhouse, and I don't want to say late. It was just later into media availability. But that was the first time he was walking in today. And it takes you back a little bit. I mean, he's a younger player, of course, but sometimes compared to the other veterans out there, he just looks and towers over them. He looks much bigger than a lot of them. And there's some big dudes in the clubhouse. Carlos Estevez is a big dude. Michael Wacha is a big dude. Jack Caglione's a really big dude. And to see him taking BP swings, the ball jumping off his bat, that just doesn't sound normal. And that should excite a lot of fans out there. And we'll probably get more video on him tomorrow. Hopefully a sit-down interview or just a 5-minute interview with him, because we've heard nothing but great things about him. And for fans out there holding out hope that with a strong start in AA, he can progress into AAA and eventually get to the big leagues, all of those things together, yes, can be wishful thinking. The hot start, learning another position to find room in Kansas City. I wanted to believe in that a few weeks ago. Then I started to realize the likelihood of that happening is still very slim. a guy who's never had a full professional season at the minor league level, is not likely to take a few months and dominate so well that you put him in Kansas City and you put him up against big league pitching. Today, hearing it and seeing it in person, there's a world in which that happens. I believe I said that in one of the episodes a month or two ago when that article came out about the Royals wanting to move him around if the bat starts to flourish in AA or AAA. It always felt like wishful thinking. I said there's a world in which it happens. I didn't have enough conviction behind it, though. I hadn't seen him played in person ever. I never saw him play in person. Didn't see him at Florida. Didn't get a chance to see him in Quad Cities. This was my first experience of seeing Jack Caglione play. And even though it's a BP round and you can't take everything away from it, sometimes it's just the pure sound off the bat where you go, that's different. And for Jack Caglione, go look at Annie's tweet. The ball sounds a little bit different coming off the bat. And I can't wait to see him have a live action one-on-one BP facing one of the major league pitchers in that rotation, whether it be Waka, whether it be Reagans. Even if it's somebody out of the bullpen, I would want to see Jack Caglione face a 26-man roster guy. That's what I'm hoping to see before we leave on Tuesday night, if I am so lucky to get that. Because in BP, that stuff was too good, too violent to just only see BP for it. It's a little bit of a tease, but more Jack Caglione stuff coming your way. Same with Carter Jensen, Blake Mitchell. And for the next guy we're talking about, Noah Cameron, man, that stuff is pretty filthy. And I'll tell you what I saw in about my 5-minute scouting session, if you will, of watching him on one of the fields today. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And look for that Twitter handle, if you don't already follow me, tomorrow morning and into the afternoon for all types of video, all types of posts, quotes. You won't miss anything if you do follow that Twitter handle. Leading into our final segment, we certainly can recap what we talked about, Jack Caglione, Carter Jensen, what's in store for tomorrow. But before I run out of time, instead of recapping all that stuff, let me just dive into what I saw from Noah Cameron. And Noah Cameron, as I can tell from some of the listeners and the followers of this podcast, he's a fan favorite. Looked great last year, made a pretty big jump. He's got the rec specs, so there's something unique about him that you can gravitate toward. Sometimes we like that with baseball players. They got the long hair like Jonathan India. They wear their cap in a funny way like Fernando Rodney. Or for Noah Cameron's case, he's got the rec specs. He's got the goggles. And growing up, I remember facing some kids that had rec specs, had goggles. I always thought it was pretty funny until they get to the big league level. They're wearing rec specs and they can be terrifying to face. There have been a lot of elite level pitchers that have worn goggles and terrified hitters. And Noah Cameron today had the type of stuff where I'd imagine it wasn't too fun to face. And he wasn't facing the Michael Massies and the Vinny Pasquantino, Jonathan India, and Salvador Perez on field 1 at this complex. He was still facing a couple of AAA and big league hopefuls over there. And that stuff looks polished. I got asked this on Twitter of, does it really stand out? I mean, he's not supposed to be known for his fastball. Is it a collection of off-speed pitches? And I believe it's a combination of everything. You can't be just an off-speed guy and not have a fastball to set it up with. And in this 5-minute scouting session, I'll call it, was very firm with the fastball. I'm not going to sit here and say the spin rate was great because I didn't have anything to clock the spin rate. But it was a 91 to 92 mile per hour looking fastball, but had some giddy up to it. It had some late life to it. You've heard Rex and Ryan say that all the time during broadcast. That looks like it has late life to it. But the curveball and the slider he was utilizing, it didn't matter if some of those guys up there knew it was coming. They weren't going to touch it. And the video I put out there was an ugly swing. It was an ugly swing, but what I didn't highlight in that video is it was a battle. It was about a 7-8 pitch battle on this field until Noah Cameron in this 3-2 count goes to a wipeout slider that was unhittable. And in that moment, you can't predict, even in spring training, he's going to give me the 3-2 slider, or he's going to try this back foot curveball or back foot slider. That's what Noah Cameron was able to do in this live BP session. And I was a believer in Noah Cameron prior to coming here. I wasn't so confident where with a strong camp, he's going to be in the rotation. I don't believe that way still today. It's not to take anything away from what I saw. It's mainly that the top 5 in the rotation at this point in time have it locked up, in my opinion. Chris Bubic could always lose that spot. I don't see Chris Bubic losing that spot. And for the other 4, Reagans ain't losing it. Lugo, Waka, and Lorenzen are not losing it. It would have to be the number 5 spot. I understand there's people out there that want Chris Bubic to be in the bullpen. He's getting stretched out to start. And hopefully he's another one of those guys that we can have a sit-down interview with and talk about being stretched out. And if he wants to move back to the rotation, how he liked it in the bullpen, all those questions should be answered by the time we leave on Tuesday night. But with Noah Cameron, what I got today was seeing the stuff in person, and the opinion I left with is that it's a big league pitcher out there. It's not just a big league pitcher where he gets a chance because somebody got hurt and you have to fill a spot in the bullpen of the rotation. No, I left today with the opinion of when he gets called up to Kansas City, it's going to be to help the roster, not just a 2-day stint. Hey, somebody's banged up. Hey, somebody's struggling. We need you in long relief. When Noah Cameron comes up, I got this sense of that stuff's too good to just be stashed away in AAA, and it's almost too good to be thrown into a long relief role. It really does feel that way. The delivery is very repeatable. The spin on some of those off-speed offerings is lethal. Gets a lot of ugly swings, as I just brought up. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't want to say Chris Bubic just because I brought him back up, and I'm not going to go as far to say Cole Reagans, but the overall pitchability, the attack, the approach that he had to each of these hitters was just pretty impressive. Can't think of another word to call it other than pretty impressive. He was doctoring the zone. He was dissecting every part of the plate. There weren't many throwaway pitches where I'm trying to set him up with the fastball. I miss high and away, overthrew it. It wasn't anything of seeing a slider that bounced 5 to 10 feet in front of the plate. It was very smooth. And you have the catchers in camp calling balls and strikes. You'll have a coach off to the side say, what was that? I don't remember a time he fell behind in the count. I mean, when he was using the fastball, he was painting the bottom corner of the zone against lefties, against righties. It was down and in. It was inside. And then if he got into a favorable count, a 1-2 count, a 2-2 count, he would put him away with that wipeout slider. That stuff is damn filthy. And I'm even more of a believer now in Noah Cameron than I was when I showed up here. There is going to be competition in this bullpen. There's going to be competition in the rotation. And what's funny is we've all discussed this 5th spot, Chris Bubic, Kyle Wright, Alec Marsh. Noah Cameron needs to have a little bit more behind his name for this battle. Not that I believe he's going to beat out Chris Bubic, because I don't. Chris Bubic was very impressive in what I saw today. Didn't get too much video on it. The fastball still looks good. That changeup looks good. The slider, it all looks good with Chris Bubic right now. It was a very professional bullpen session. With Noah Cameron, though, I almost feel like he could be the runner-up for that rotation spot, even over somebody like Alec Marsh. Now, Alec Marsh deserves his praise for being a big league pitcher, being somebody that had a double-digit strikeout game at the big league level. Noah Cameron simply hasn't done that yet. But that stuff just feels like it's going to translate. Whether it be out of the bullpen or it be in the rotation, I just get this sense that Noah Cameron's going to be a contributor, and a big-time contributor for this team going into 2025. And you know what? He's another one of those names where if it does work out, again, it's a crapshoot. I can love what I've seen from a player, a Carter Jensen, a Blake Mitchell, a Jack Caglione, and they never do it at the big league level. That's baseball 101. Scouts would tell you that all the time. I could like everything about a player. It just doesn't work out. But if it does, right, we're going to play this hypothetical. If it does work out with Noah Cameron, he joins Cole Reagans. He would join, hopefully, Chris Bubic, maybe Brady Singer for what he did last year, as another notch or a feather in the cap for the Royals pitching development. turning somebody like him, not a surefire 1-1 pick, into a big-time contributor in the rotation or the bullpen. Now you start to have that belief where other teams look at you and say, don't let that pitcher go to Kansas City because they're going to discover something with him that we weren't looking into. You start to see that wheel spin a little bit. You start to see the pendulum swing back in favor of the Royals, of they're no longer the organization where one guy leaves them, they shine elsewhere. If Noah Cameron turns into a big-time contributor, it's going to swing completely in favor of the Royals becoming that team like a Cleveland, like a Tampa Bay, of if they're interested in a guy that's struggling for us, or they're taking this guy in the 4th or the 5th round, they're going to turn that guy into a stud. We saw it for years with the Guardians in Cleveland. We saw it for years with Tampa Bay. And lo and behold, the Royals have a lot of Tampa Bay Rays influence with Matt Quatrero and Paul Hoover. Brian Sweeney certainly turned that group around as well, coming from Cleveland. It's no surprise that this pitching development has made great strides over the last couple of years. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB, where baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it'll be our Day 2 takeaways. Lots of videos, lots of interviews, like the Lucas Ursig one-on-one we had, which you can listen to wherever you get to your podcast. That came out around 3 p.m. today. This will be our night episode. We actually had 7 episodes this entire week. We'll continue to have a lot of content throughout the next few days, but video, photos, interviews, quick interviews, long interviews, we'll have it all, and another breakdown of our takeaways from Day 2 and Surprise. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.